The people then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The people then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. This gospel reading recounts the story of Jesus' cleansing of the temple when he drove out the vendors and money changers. But this week, another aspect of the narrative is on my mind: Jesus' promise to raise the temple in 3 days after it is destroyed. The people think that he's talking about the temple where they go to worship and make sacrifices, the very one Jesus had just purged of profiteers, but the evangelist tells us that he meant another temple, the temple of his body. Jesus' body is a temple, and so are our own bodies. St. Paul writes, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God, and that you are not your own?" Our bodies are gifts from God, and we need to respect our own and one another's bodies. That includes the bodies of those who are differently abled than ourselves. Yet churches and religious institutions have not always lived out that conviction that all bodies are equal and to be respected. Shannon Dingle, a writer and disability activist, says, "I love the church. I can't and I won't give up the church, no matter how wounded I feel by it. Yet I know more disabled people who have left the church than who have stayed. I know more parents who have left after giving birth to or adopting children with disabilities than those who have stayed. I did not understand why until I dug into disability history," she said. In the 1980s, the disabled civil rights movement launched. ADAPT, a group that protested successfully against harmful healthcare legislation, led the way, focusing on transportation and wheelchair access on buses at that time. Ultimately, their efforts led to the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, in 1990. Before the ADA, buildings did not have to have ramps, parking lots did not have to have designated spots, and public transportation did not have to have wheelchair lifts. Before 1990, disabled people literally did not have the same rights under U.S. law as abled people. She continues, "Today, disabled people still do not have the same rights as abled people in U.S. churches or religious schools. Those institutions are exempt from the ADA. It did not happen by accident or loophole. They actively fought against being legally accountable to provide access to disabled people. They did not hold themselves morally or biblically accountable. This outcome communicated to the disabled community that they did not belong in mainstream U.S. Christianity, as churches either actively opposed the ADA or passively did not abide by it because they were not required to do so legally. The cost issue for adhering to the ADA was a real concern. It would be unfair to dismiss that objection. Yet instead of asking for additional time to comply with the law, allowing for the major expenses of accessibility to be spread out, Christians by and large said no to the ADA. So, Shannon Dingle writes, disabled people did not leave the church. The church did not even leave us. No, we were never really welcome. When we choose the brave act of entering a church, we are declaring that we will resist the ableism that has been baptized, protesting civilly by being present at all. She says, it takes all the forgiveness we can find to love churches that did not seem to want us. Here at Trinity, we are blessed with many gifts. We are a vibrant, worshiping community with a commitment to social justice in our town and our world. We are blessed with the gift of a beautiful, historic structure, this one we sit in today that is so glorious with the sunlight streaming through the windows. But this wonderful church was built long before the ADA was passed in 1990, long before people were generally conscious of the need for greater accessibility. The gift of beautiful old buildings like ours, that gift comes with a responsibility. We must care for them, and we must seek to remedy their limitations. And the most pressing limitation of our campus is its lack of accessibility for those who use wheelchairs or have mobility concerns. Now, our church has been talking about making the buildings accessible for a long time, for about 2 decades. We've gotten stuck at many points along the way between the cost, leadership turnover, and the complexity of the project. Now, as to complexity, take a look around. Walk around the church and see. There are stairs and steps everywhere. Everywhere. Every entrance to the church has steps, literally. And there are steps to get to different parts of the facility that would seem to be on the same level, but they're not because they were built at different times. Now, fortunately, we are able to use a portable ramp to get people into this church space itself, but once they are inside, they might not be able to access other parts of the campus. Even to get from the church to the restroom in the parish house hallway, as you know, those of you who have been here before, when you go out there are 3 steps you have to go up. They seem like little small steps, but for some, they're just as much as a long staircase. And then if one is able to access the hallway, then there's not any way that a wheelchair could fit inside one of our restrooms. So just to be clear, we say all are welcome here at Trinity, but someone could come to church here and not be able to use the restroom. A child and her parent might come to church here, but find that if one of them uses a wheelchair, they cannot attend Sunday school in the education wing, because the only way to get there is through the stairs outside the gym or the stairs from the parish house hallway into the gym. And then once they're there, because we currently hold Sunday school in the basement, they'd be faced with 2 steep stairwells to get to class. And then what about our justice programs? After the current health crisis ends and we return to hosting our lovely Saturday community meal in the gym, there are people who will not be able to get inside. They can take their meal to go, of course, but why should they have to? They should have the same access to fellowship, to sit at the same table and share in that gracious meal. The lack of access also affects volunteers who cannot help in the food pantry or with cooking and serving the community meal if they cannot manage our steps. So we must do better. And I include myself in that. I must do better too. While accessibility was on my radar, for a while I thought that it would have to wait until we were in a stronger position. But we are strong enough. The Americans with Disabilities Act exempted religious institutions, but we should not want an exemption. Christians should have been leading the way all along. Instead, we have to catch up. Religious organizations have had 30 years to make plans to comply with ADA access. That's too long. Now it's time to act. Trinity Church, now we must step forward in faith and in action. And let's not do so with a sense of fear and anxiety at the costs and the complications, but with the joyful expectation of more fully welcoming in God's beloved community. It is our sacred obligation to increase accessibility at Trinity so that all of God's children are fully welcome at our church and our community programs. To that end, the vestry, the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and I have been discussing next steps in making Trinity accessible. Architectural plans were drawn up a few years ago, actually, for certain items, and we're beginning the process of talking with contractors to get quotes. We're also looking at grant opportunities and thinking about community fundraising efforts to help with the costs. For the first phase of the accessibility project, we need 3 important solutions. 1, to create a ramp to access the parish house and the office wing here, which will also connect with the church so that people can come in that way instead of asking for a portable ramp to be put out for them. 2, to transform the existing small restrooms and part of the outer sacristy and choir room into 2 larger accessible restrooms. And 3, create an accessible connection between the parish house, the office wing, and the gym, the education wing, so that wheelchair-using guests of our food and justice programs can get inside the gym that way, and then use the restrooms on this side here, the office wing, and so that everyone who comes to our campus can come through in a seamless way. These 3 essential solutions will not create accessibility for all areas of the church, not the undercroft or the basement of the education wing, but we will get to those areas in time. And until then, we will strive to bring programs like Sunday school and childcare to the first floor so that we are as fully accessible as we can be. This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days? Trinity Church was founded almost 150 years ago, and our current stone church was consecrated over 100 years ago. Our parish offices and education wing are almost 70 years old. We will not make them fully accessible in 3 days, 3 months, or probably even 3 years. But we can, and we must make progress. We must begin the process. And we can make a substantial improvement in accessibility over the course of even the next year by taking on those 3 solutions I discussed. I look forward to sharing more with you in the coming weeks and months. And as we begin making progress on that front, we can also begin thinking about accessibility beyond wheelchair access. What are all the ways we need to be more accessible to all of God's children of various abilities and capacities? But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Amy Kinney, a professor and disability activist, writes, "The church has forgotten that we worship a disabled God whose wounds survived resurrection. Jesus retains his scars after resurrection as a mark of his victory over death. Why can't the church view disabled bodies with the same wholeness and strength?" In today's gospel, Jesus cleanses the temple by driving out those taking away from its religious mission. Now, in our time, we need to drive out the mindset of ableism that keeps us from recognizing just how vitally important it is that we make our church accessible. Instead, let's embrace the vision that all of us are equally important. Now is the time to drive out the mindset of scarcity that makes us think that we must wait until we have more resources. Instead, let's embrace God's abundance and see that by investing in this project, we are investing in our own growth as a community of faith. Now is the time to drive out the mindset of perfectionism that prevents us from moving forward until we've figured out a plan to do everything at once and perfectly. Instead, let's embrace the reality that we can do something right now, and that something will make a difference, a big difference. Now is the time to make our church more accessible. Only then will we truly be able to say that all are welcome here. Amen.